Start our recording. Good morning. Happy Easter Resurrection Sunday. Welcome to our Sunday morning Sunday school. Continuing our series through the Bible, we are in the age of the patriarchs. We are still in the year 1671 BC. Again, we are taking our time. We are going nice and slow because Joseph in Egypt is a game changer for the secular world. Game changer for the people of the Bible, and certainly a spiritual game changer for us in our spiritual legacy and heritage. So we're taking our time here. So the people in place and in charge of the powers that be at this time have not changed, but a quick refresher. So as we're looking to the Bible as our ultimate authority, we're getting background info from Egyptologist David Roll and his writings. So at this time in 1671 BC, Middle Bronze Age 2A, we have in China their first dynasty, the Xia dynasty, with its last emperor, Emperor Ji, who by all accounts was not the best of guys and definitely seems to have led to the demise of the Xia dynasty. And we'll get to all that when that time comes. Closer to home for the Bible folks, we are under Egypt, the world power of the day, in the 12th dynasty of their Middle Kingdom. We have father and son ruling together. Father Senuseret III is co-reigning along with his son, who is Amenemhat III. 104 here. As dad's taking a little bit of a backseat and letting his son get his feet wet, fresh. You unexpectedly close the connection. Well, how about expectedly reconnect the connection? Anyway, so Amenemhat III is the Pharaoh of Joseph. He is the Pharaoh who had the dreams that Joseph interpreted. He is the Pharaoh of the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine, and later on Jacob and the whole family coming down. Back we go. So as mentioned, we have in China in 1671 BC, Middle Bronze Age. 2A, we have Emperor Ji of the Xia dynasty. We have in Egypt, Senuseret III, as was mentioned. Let's see, 92. Yes, Senuseret III, ruling Egypt, the main world power of this time. There he is, looking a bit serious, as we've discussed. And he's co-reigning with his son, Amenemhat III. Once again, it's this guy right here, Amenemhat III, who is Joseph's Pharaoh. This is the Pharaoh that had the dreams that Joseph interpreted. This is the Pharaoh of the 7 years of plenty and the 7 years of famine and bringing Joseph's family into Egypt. This is the guy.
About how old was the son?
Don't know. I'll have to double check and look into that. See if yeah, it's a natural question.
I never knew, about interpreting the dream that was actually Pharaoh's son, Pharaoh.
Exactly. Yeah, they both shared the title of Pharaoh. As said, when the father brings in the son to co-reign with him, the father starts to take a back seat. He's still recognized as having authority and all that, but the son starts running things and gets his feet wet and gets in the practice. And the father kind of directs things through the son so that once the father passes, it's an easy transition for the son to pick up and go. So Amenemhat III is the Pharaoh who has those dreams. And see if I can look up his age ballpark at this time. Keeping in mind that the powers that be in academia and research and studies in these scientific fields, there is not consensus on the timing of these things. They seem to be off by a couple, 200-300 years in some of their timelines of things from how things actually seem to lay out. We see when we adjust the timeline along with David Roll's new chronology, we see that it all of a sudden lines up with the Bible, and there's the Bible evidence right in the right time frame. But if their timeline is wrong, they're not going to see the evidence for the Bible. So there's confusion over and lack of consensus on when these people ruled and reigned, and also that would also factor into how old they were at the time and when these things happened in their lives. So as much as we know about Egypt, and we know a lot, we have a lot of great information because the sand actually preserved a lot of it, where in Mesopotamia, a lot of things were destroyed because of the marshy quality of the area. So a lot of rot deterioration. We don't have a lot of items retained like we do in Egypt. And so, but even that, as much as we have of Egypt, one of the Egyptologists in Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus, Kent Weeks, I believe his name was, he said, if all we have compared to all that was, we still only have rags and tatters. That was the phrase he used. So there's still so much we don't know. So if everyone presents themselves like they've got all the answers and all the info, run. They don't. But we have the foundation of the Word of God, and we see that everything else, when properly understood, lines up right with it. And anything else where we have gaps of information, just wait. As we continue to discover, things will be unearthed and we'll find themselves lining up just as God proclaimed. So yeah, so it's fascinating. We're still learning things, and I'm still adding things as they're being discovered in real time now. So exciting stuff for nerds like me. So that's Egypt. In the Bible lands of Mesopotamia, we've got the new nation of Assyria, which will be a very big factor in the Bible as we go, times of Kings and Chronicles and all that. Assyria, in their early days, their first capital was the city of Assur right here on the Tigris River, northern part of Mesopotamia. At this point in time, it's still kind of sketchy. Old Assyria looks like Sargon I was their king at the time of Joseph in Egypt, which brings us to southern Mesopotamia, where we've got two main cities that will soon be joined by a third, but that's yet to come. In the city of Isen, we've got King Bur-Sin. This it's called glyptic art, when you have something on a cylinder seal and you roll it out and from the seal impression, and that's what you get. So this is a cylinder seal from King Bur-Sin during the time of Joseph in Egypt. He's king of Isen. And that leaves one more city, the city of Larsa, which is currently ruled by their king Abisari. And Larsa is down here in southern Mesopotamia, just a bit south of Isen. So that is down there in Shinar, Sumer, land between the two rivers, Euphrates and the Tigris. Over here is the Promised Land. Over here is Egypt. And so we have the family of the Bible. We have the twin brothers mentioned in the devotional, Esau and Jacob. Esau is in Mount Seir. The area will be called Edom, named for him, and his descendants will be called Edomites, who will factor very much in the Bible adventures as we go along. So this whole mountain range is the range of Mount Seir, where Esau's family takes up residence. So we see where that falls in line, where we've got the Promised Land up here and Egypt over here. There is where Esau is. Esau is now 120 years old. His twin brother Jacob, also 120 years old, is in the city of Hebron, along with most of his kids. Hebron is where Abraham and Sarah are buried, and now Isaac is buried there too. And so Jacob, 120 years old, is here with his kids. Judah, who is in the line of Christ, is 33 years old here. But Judah is off to the side over here, went from Adullam to Chezib, and he's married with 3 kids. And we will get to the adventures of them growing up and their life and his 4th son. That is all going to come into play as we go. But right now, in Genesis 41, which is where we are picking up, Genesis 41, Joseph is 30 years old. He has gone from the prison in Memphis to the capital, Itchitawi, to meet with Pharaoh Amenemhat III. He has interpreted his dreams, and Pharaoh says, okay, this is the guy we're going to put in charge. he becomes his vizier, which is his number 2, which is like a prime minister, basically second only to Pharaoh. Basically what Joseph says goes, as they are dealing with all that is about to take place. So Genesis 41, verse 45 again from last week. This one very, very powerful and significant verse. Genesis 41, verse 45. So what happens is Pharaoh named Joseph Zaphanath Paneah. He gave him Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, as his wife. And Joseph went forth over the land of Egypt. So we broke down the definitions and the meanings of that name last week and saw that Zaphanath is actually a kind of garbled version of the Egyptian word Zaphanath, which means he who is called. And so in the records where we see Hebrew, Asiatic from the continent of Asia, they're the slaves, we see them listed as, here's his name, his Asiatic or Canaanite name, he who is called, and then his Egyptian name. So we see that in the records, and we'll get to that. So Joseph is Zaphanath Paneah, he who is called Paneah. Pa is the, so he who is called the. Aneah is life, or the one who lives. So Joseph's Egyptian name, Zaphanath Paneah, is Joseph, he who is called the one who lives. Remember, Joseph was not only sold off to slavery, but he was also reported to his father as being dead, killed by an animal. And so that's the status of Joseph as far as anyone knows. And so, but the reality is Joseph, who was basically written off as dead, is actually alive and being restored and lifted up by the work of God in his life. And he's giving God full credit and glory and recognition of that. So we ended last week confirming the Egyptian meaning of the Egyptian name Joseph was given. So now, again, taking our time, let's talk about this name, Aneah, which means the one who lives. So vizier is the number 2, prime minister. Do we have records outside the Bible of Egypt of a vizier named Aneah, he the one who lives? Yes, we do. So here's what's pretty cool. We're in the 12th dynasty, 12th line of rulers, which will lead into the 13th dynasty, next line of rulers. So here's David Roll's take on this. The most renowned figure of this whole period, 12th dynasty into the 13th dynasty, was a vizier named Anku. That Egyptian symbol, the Ankh, where it's got the circle and the bar across, and then it comes down, that's the symbol of life. That name is actually pronounced Aneah, Joseph's name, Pa-Aneah. He was called the one who lives. It's that same word, that same symbol for life. So there was a vizier named Anku, Aneah, life. That name seems to be hypochoristicon, which I laugh every time I see that word. It's a long word that means shortening. So it's a shortening of a longer name, but retaining the meaning, the one who lives.
I'm still stuck on hypochoristicon.
Isn't that hilarious?
Yeah, that's where I stopped.
Yeah. Hypo meaning under, so it's a lower. Yeah. 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 So John is a hypochoristicon of Jonathan.
Right.
Yeah. So there we go. So what do we know about this guy in the secular Egyptian records? He says, this famous vizier, he's attested to, he's recorded in the reign of the first ruler of the 13th dynasty, a pharaoh named Sobek-Hotep the first. Sobek is cool, that means crocodile. So we'll get to the crocodile Nile stuff as we go. So before Sobek-Hotep the first guy of the 13th dynasty, where we've got Aneah, Anku here as vizier, before that, we have a gap here. We don't have the names. So there's room to push Anku, Aneah, back into the 12th dynasty because we don't have any other names there. Now, this pharaoh in the 13th dynasty, Sobek-Hotep I, he is one of those kings during this time when the Nile records are the high floods that we talk about that affect the years of plenty and years of famine. that are recorded down further south at the Semna Gorge, where they've got markings that we found showing the markings of the water levels of the Nile. So that was from the end of the 12th dynasty into the 13th dynasty. So it fits this. So this guy, Anku Anea, he belongs very much to this same area where we have Joseph and the Great Famine. So if this guy, Anea Anku, is one and the same as Pa-Anea, we found the biblical Joseph in the records, the secular records of Egypt's Middle Kingdom. So, okay, so if we're thinking this guy is Joseph, they got the same name and the same position at the same time frame, what do these secular records tell us about this vizier, this number two, this prime minister named Anku, Pa-Anea, the one who lives? David Roll here. Seems he fits remarkably well into the Joseph story. He appears to succeed a vizier named Simon II, who was attested in the early years of Amenemhat III. So it looks like Amenemhat III, when he was brought on by his father to become pharaoh, he had a number two named Simon II, who was, looks like he was older, looking to retire, kind of transition out. And so Joseph comes in. So they're able to transition from Simon to Anea, to Joseph. We have a black granite statue to a vizier that was found in the Temple of Karnak that was dedicated by Anku, by Anea. So it could be an image of Simon II, who adopted Joseph in this line and trained him up in the ways of being a vizier. So we also have another title, Anku Anea, overseer of the fields. That could be Joseph, the years he was given the task of organizing the storage of the agricultural produce before he was elevated and took over from Simon II. So here's Joseph preparing all this stuff. So this guy Anku was known as overseer of the fields. Joseph was in charge of bringing in the wheat that was produced. Genesis tells us Joseph built the grain silos, the granaries, throughout Egypt to store the grain from the years of plenty for distribution during the years of famine. Okay. It is quite remarkable, therefore, we find references in the documents of the time in Egypt to the granaries of Anku Anea, the one who lives. So the same guy did the same thing. We also hear of a new government organization called the Department of the People's Giving, which David Roll's thought here, Department of the People's Giving, that's the collecting of the grain from the people for storage and for later redistribution during the time of famine. So we've got Department of the People's Giving, we've got the grain silos, the granaries of the one who lives, all here in the secular Egyptian records right from this time frame when Joseph is the number two. Joseph's the vizier, the one who lives, who's given that same name. The Department of State, known as the Ka-En-Jed Ramech, was contemporary at the same time with this vizier Anku over Egypt. Another interesting thing, this great vizier, Anea Anku, became sort of a cult figure, where many of the Egyptians named their kids after him. We have, and this even happened among the Asiatics, those from the land of Canaan who were in Egypt. They also did this. We have a document called the Brooklyn Papyrus. It's held in the Brooklyn Museum. It lists the domestic servants of a single Egyptian estate in Thebes. In this list, we find 30 male slaves, out of which 4 have that name, Anku Anea. Another 5 are named after Anku's son and successor in office, Reseneb. We have 8 more that are compound names, Anku Hemeset, Anku Seneb, or Seneb Reseneb. Now this Brooklyn Papyrus, it's dated to the reign of Sobek Hotep III, who was the 26th ruler in that 13th dynasty. So some decades after Anea died, but not long after the time of his son, Reseneb. So here's the question. Why so many slaves named after these 2 viziers? David Roll's suggestion on that is that the 2 viziers were themselves Asiatic from the land of Canaan. And they were heroes to their people. Here's another thought. Is it also pure coincidence Joseph had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim? Anku Anea had 2 sons, Reseneb and Imeru. who followed him in office as viziers of Egypt during the early 13th dynasty, coming off the 12th. So it becomes very interesting. We find Egyptian texts of this time referring to, like, here's a quote, the Asiatic Kui, who is called Reseneb, named after Joseph's son, or Ankh, who is called Pa-Am, who is called the Asiatic. So here we have all these names connecting to Joseph and his sons right from this time frame. Questions, reactions, thoughts? Does that make sense? Do we see the similarity?
I just had something when you said government.
Yeah.
Government program, I'm like, what? Right?
Different program.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously a very different context. So,
Yes.
yeah, we're not talking what we know
That was
today.
the first welfare.
Well, actually, it wasn't, because it wasn't. See, that's the beauty of this. I saw a thing lately talking about Robin Hood. I shared it with Ashley, how the misperceptions of Robin Hood. He didn't steal from the rich and give to the poor. He took back from the government what they wrongfully appropriated and gave back to the people what belonged to them. So, that makes a little more sense now.
Yeah, because it's actually their grain.
It's their grain, but also,
Voluntary, right?
yes, well, they were taxed. So this was their tax. So they pay the taxes, but so this is just like we pay taxes. So it was legitimately taxed. They were representative government, so they were taxed. And so this was then not just welfare distributed to them. We see it was sold to them. This isn't the difference between this and Social Security is this is not a Ponzi scheme.
But you pay into Social Security. Yeah.
And then the money is the money there right now? No, it's not, because they did other things with it.
So the way it should work.
The way it should work is what happened here. This is what Social Security should have been.
Yeah.
Is okay, you contribute, and then then it's yours, and then in this case, it's sold back to people as they need it. But the difference with Social Security is your money is taken and it's not held for you. It's used in other things. And so basically other people paying into Social Security now is paying the benefits to people now. So you're receiving Social Security, that's coming from someone else's paycheck, not yours. The money from your paycheck is already
It's already
spent.
gone. So that's why they
Yeah.
keep saying
It'll run out because we got more people drawing Social Security than contributing to it. And so that's why God is a capitalist, because capitalism is based 100%, because capitalism is godly, because it's voluntary, voluntary selling, voluntary buying, and it is free. And no government coercion or involvement or cronyism or any of that. If it's cronyism, it's not capitalism. And so government's only role is to protect individual freedom and honor contracts and things like that. And so that's where where it was done right here. It's been done wrong and abused in other contexts. And so the best thing that can be done is no government involvement. People, you're informed of this, so you take care of yourselves. But God was doing something here God was doing something unique with Egypt to prepare them for what was going to happen later on. And so, because remember, Egypt was not a godly nation, but they were descendants of Noah through Ham. And so Ham himself had been worshipped as the sun god Shamash. And so this corruption of what God had given to them, a godly man, Joseph, is being used to bless them, but they're also going to, because of their continued departure from God, God's going to make a separation between the people of God and the people of Egypt. And we see that. So God is working in all of this. So fascinating stuff.
I love the story.
Oh, it's incredible.
Because anything and everywhere goes, and he goes a lot of places, he just has God's favor on him.
And he keeps his humility and gives God the credit and glory, and he has the Midas touch.
He does his best, whether he's down low
Mhm.
or he's up high. He stayed the same.
Amen. Same thing with Daniel.
Yeah. Yes.
They're two very similar examples of that wonderful attitude of
spiritual
awareness and maturity, despite that doesn't change with their circumstances.
Didn't live as a victim,
Right.
like a lot of,
Yeah.
do.
Oh, yeah.
Now the victim mentality, but you don't see any of that.
Exactly.
It's just like, okay, I've got to get out of this situation, and but the next step is jail, as an innocent man. But he's still God, he ends up controlling or being the,
Yeah,
what's the word I'm looking for? The boss, I
Yes.
guess, of the jail system,
yeah,
and, but he just uses them in such powerful
Amen.
ways. And I just love that. I love the whole story.
Yeah.
And because, I hate to even talk about Satan, but there is
It's okay.
Satan.
Yeah.
And we can see where he just tried so hard
Oh,
to
yeah.
get rid of him,
Oh, yeah.
but God just wasn't having it because
Amen.
God had such an amazing plan for this man, and then he goes on and saves, I don't know how many people.
Yeah. And they extended that through them.
Yeah.
So yeah, God delivers the nation to be through Joseph. He often does that through one person. Yeah.
Daniel and Joseph both used the talents that God gave them for being an overseer.
100%.
They were honest.
Amen.
This came through and they were humble.
Amen.
Honest, and God was able to use them. So that, for me, that's whatever talent you have, if you think you don't have one, that's something.
Amen.
And if you give it to God, He can use it.
100%. Beautiful. I love it. And here's the balance that, human nature kind of pendulum swings. We're called to be spiritually mature and, too often in the middle, find our balance. Joseph was not so super God man that he didn't feel what he was going through. In fact, the brothers would later say, when they feel guilty about what they've done on the long walk home, they're like, didn't we hear him crying out to us, begging us not to do this while he was in the pit, we were sitting there having our lunch, So Joseph cried out about what he was going through. It wasn't fun being a slave, but God blessed him and elevated him. Wasn't fun going from slavery to prison, innocently, but then God blessed him and so on and so forth. And now here he is. So what we can gain from Joseph is we're not wrong to acknowledge things done to us or things we experience hurt, and we're affected by them. We're not wrong to be affected by them. But as I'm fond of saying, that is not the end. That's not where our story ends. Our story does not end in our circumstance or our feelings. Our story ends in God bringing through to deliverance and a victory as we stay true to him. Nothing takes us out of God's hands. The only thing that can is us walking out of his hands, because the door is open. But if we keep through the example of Joseph and Daniel, if we keep our eyes on him, acknowledge our hurt, frustration, disappointment, heartache, etc., but still have our faith and trust in the reality and truth of God and his faithfulness to us, despite our not deserving, despite our own sins and mistakes, he'll see us through. And what did Jacob say in his prayer? I am unworthy, but he acknowledged God's faithfulness, even when he wasn't always faithful. Tremendous blessings. So appreciate all that very much. So Joseph's period in office here began with those years of plenty, the high flood levels, which are right in line with years 13 and 19 of Amenemhet III. His 13th to 19th year, 7 years of plenty, with the rising, where the Nile River flooded. It floods every year, that they depend upon that, but it flooded so much that it brought more water, which brought more minerals to the desert lands, so that they're able to plant more and produce and harvest more. These were the 7 years of plenty. We've got them documented in secular records. Years 13 to 19 of Amenemhet III were those years of plenty, the high flood levels. So Joseph was 30 when he came to office, and the Bible later tells us, end of Genesis, he lives to the ripe old age of 110. So he lives beyond the 12th dynasty into the 13th dynasty. Now, David Roll, as I mentioned, and I'm only focusing on him because he's the guy where I'm getting a lot of this information, not all of it, but a lot of it. He's, again, an agnostic. He's the one who doesn't take a stand on the spiritual things, but he's recognizing the historical reality here of the Bible, lining up with what he sees in his Egyptology studies. He doesn't advocate or accept the long-lived patriarchal ages given in the Bible. That's a bit of a stretch for him, but he does agree with the case of Joseph living this long. He does see that because it lines up with this secular guy, Anku Anea. Later, Egyptian texts, perhaps influenced by his life, refer to 110 years as the ideal lifespan. If you could live to 110, that's cool. That's how long Joseph lived. And so Anku Anea, the great vizier, had a remarkably long period in office, just like Joseph. So here's secular records lining up right with the Bible that never had to change. And so, yes, we do, when we look at the right place, the right time frame, we do have secular confirmation of Joseph in world history. Egypt, the greatest power in the world. Joseph, number 2. So, yeah, powerful stuff. So, and even if we didn't have those records, the Bible stands, those records might be buried on the sand, waiting to be discovered, but it still happened. We don't know everything that happened, but everything that happened fit the Bible because it can't not. So let's talk about those 7 years of plenty here. So 1670, we finally move forward a year. Yay. So Esau and Jacob are now 121. Judah is 33. Joseph now 31. So here in Genesis 41, let's pick up in verse 46. Now Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Now Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, went through all the land of Egypt. So now 1670 BC, during the 7 years of plenty, the land brought forth abundantly. So he gathered all the food of these 7 years, which occurred in the land of Egypt, placed the food in the cities. He placed in every city the food from its own surrounding fields. Thus Joseph stored up grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he stopped measuring it, for it was beyond measure. So much they couldn't keep track of how much there was. So we're in the 7 years of plenty here. And during this time, we have a couple of births, because we know births and genealogy are pretty important in the Bible. So we've got a couple here. Right here with Joseph in the same year, Joseph and his wife Asenath, they have a son in Genesis 41, verse 50 and 51. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph, whom Asenath, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore him. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. Manasseh means making to forget. So he was named for that. So he's having a blessing here. And hold your place here in Genesis 41. His brother Levi looks to become a father about this time. We have in Exodus chapter 6, verse 16, we are told that Levi, Exodus 6, Exodus 4, here we go, Exodus 6, 16. These are the names of the sons of Levi, according to the generations. Gershon and Kohath and Merari, and then goes on from there about Levi's life. So Levi has 3 sons. First one's born now, Gershon. And so from these 3 sons will be lines of Levites that have different roles to serve in the tabernacle service. And so the first one is born now, Gershon. This is also mentioned in Numbers 3:17. I guess Numbers 3:17, which tells us the same thing. Numbers 3:17. These are the names of the sons, these then are the sons of Levi by their names, Gershon, and then later Kohath and Merari. This is also recorded because the Bible wanted to make sure we didn't miss this. A third place in 1 Chronicles chapter 6. Kings, Chronicles, 1 Chronicles chapter 6. We are told twice in verse 1, which goes through the priestly line here. 1 Chronicles chapter 6, verse 1 says, the sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Verse 16 says the same thing. The sons of Levi were Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. So there you have it. Levi had these 3 sons. First one, Gershon here, born about 1670, when Levi is about 35 years old. One more birth, a couple of years later, about 1668. Here we are in Genesis 41 again. We have Joseph's second son. Joseph's about 33 years old. So Genesis 41, 52, and 53. He named the second son Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. And when the 7 years of plenty came to, which had been in the land of Egypt, came to an end, so we're drawing that to a close here. The sentence will go on from there. So Ephraim means fruitfulness. So Joseph's blessed with these two sons. And spoiler alert, these two sons, since Levi, the tribe of Levi, doesn't get any land, the tribe of Joseph is split in two. There's a tribe for Ephraim and a tribe for Manasseh. Joseph, the one son, gets two tribes out of the deal. So we still have 12 tribes on the land. So here's something interesting. Potiphar and Potiphar, it's the same guy. Joseph was reunited with his old master, Potiphar, who quickly offered his own daughter, Asenath. We talk about names and meaning things. Her name means she belongs to you. Now, who names their daughter that at birth? I don't know, but that's what Asenath means. Yeah. So he who threw Joseph in jail for the accusation of messing with his wife now gives his daughter to Joseph in marriage. My how times change. Yeah. He gives Asenath in marriage to the servant who had now become his master. Asenath bore Joseph two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. So they set up home in the eastern delta, this part of Egypt, where the Giza dream sheets come from, this area up here, this delta, this is where Joseph sets up shop. Eastern Delta district of Kohath region surrounding the modern town of Phakas. So here Joseph sets up home, which is interesting because this is the same area where his great-grandpa Abraham, this is where he interacted with the Pharaoh of the 10th dynasty, Pharaoh Khedi IV. So Joseph comes up to Phakas here, which is right here. We see there's the later Exodus route that they took, departing from up here. So Joseph sets up shop right there in Phakas. So Joseph's life has been through some changes now. From being a boy wandering the hills of Canaan with sheep and goats, from languishing in Egypt state prison, now here he is. So busy times, frantic activity happening from one end of the Nile Valley to the other. So let's zoom out here. So here's something kind of fascinating. Notice it said that he put the granaries in each local place. So the locals would pay their taxes and the grain they paid, they contributed, would stay right there in that local vicinity. So later on, when they came to buy the grain, they would be buying their own that they had contributed. So their tax money went to their benefit, or their tax grain, what they taxed, they benefited from locally. And so it's not like California being taxed to pay for something in Ohio. So they kept it locally. But also the leaders of those local areas called nomarchs, their power, we see this in the secular records, something happened that greatly diminished their power and elevated the power of Pharaoh. Well, now we know from the Bible what that was. So huge political changes taking place. These regional chieftains were forced to relinquish their hold on district government. Many of their larger states were confiscated. Nothing would be allowed to stand in the way of this push to secure the maximum grain reserves. Years of plenty before the famine crisis began. Amenemhat, Pharaoh, rewarded Joseph with a country estate up here in the eastern delta. Small town that was called Roarti, right up here, nearby. So Joseph, the Hebrew vizier, turned this old riverside summer residence of Abraham's, Pharaoh Khedi IV, he turned that into one of the administrative centers in Egypt. There were two, one here and one down south by the waterway of Joseph, Bar Yusuf. They're both called House of the Department. In Egyptian, that's Hawari. The T's are silent unless they're followed by another vowel. The purpose of these two houses of the department were to coordinate the collecting and storing of the country's grain taxation. These are admin headquarters of the Department of the People's Giving. So Joseph's got one of them where he lives up there. So down south, we have to remember Upper Egypt is the bottom part, Lower Egypt is the top part, because the Nile flows from north-south up to north to the Mediterranean. So the Hawari of the valley in the lower part, Upper Egypt, was built right by the waterway of Joseph. and by where Amenemhat would actually have one of his pyramids built. So that's right here. So Joseph built the waterway of Joseph, the Bar Yusuf, it's still called today, going from the Nile to this Fayum basin, where when the floods became too much, they was able to divert the flood waters off to the side here. So that little lump of dirt right there is what remains of Amenemhat III's pyramid, right by where Joseph's waterway is. That's where he chose to put his pyramid. That's the pyramid of Amenemhat III here. That's how it looks today. Waterway of Joseph. Crocodileopolis we'll get to, but see the crocodiles here that the Nile is famous for?
Are those, what is that, like fossils?
No, those are carvings.
Oh, they're carving.
Hello, good morning. Yeah, so yeah, those are carvings of the crocodigators, as our family likes to call them. So here we see the results of the water in the desert areas. See, there's Pharaoh's pyramid in the background there with the waterway of Joseph here. Tour going through. So the work of Joseph meant a lot to Pharaoh Amenemhat III because he put his pyramid right there. He had another period off somewhere else, but it looks like this is the actual pyramid that he used. There's the unearthing of stuff. Yeah, so there we have Amenemhat III and his pyramid in this area where the headquarters was, one of two headquarters, one at Joseph's house in the north, one down here in the south by the waterway of Joseph, where they're working to overcome the Nile floods here. So this is in that Fayum basis. Fayum was also known as Crocodileopolis. And if you're going to live in any city, I would want to live in a city called Crocodileopolis. Sharknado, yeah, that kind of thing. Kind of sounds like it. So here is the Fayum Crocodileopolis right here. There's the Bar Yusuf, the waterway of Joseph. So here's what we're talking about here. Notice we'll see a lot of water wheels as we go here. And once again, I'm looking at my screen, not at the big screen up there like y'all are. So this is still the waterway of Joseph, the Bar Yusuf, is still in operation today.
What's this ocean?
This is Nile overflow.
Is it salt or fresh?
Salt, I believe. I'm sorry, no, so I believe it's actually fresh, my mistake, yeah. Yeah, today it's called the Bar Yusuf, the water of Joseph. Oh, it's called Fayum. Yeah, Fayum. Yeah, yeah. It kind of sounds like that. Faiyum. Yeah.
So there's alligators in there today?
That I don't know.
Because
Florida.
yeah,
Eh?
they're
Yes.
alligators, terrible.
Yes, they are.
They will eat you.
Yes.
Your dogs.
And one of the more recent graphic movies, a lot of fiction that was done telling the Exodus story. The rivers turned to bloods because all the crocodigators were eating people.
Yeah, we saw it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we saw it. That's what they said.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's-
So this became famous throughout the classical world because one of the things that Pharaoh built here was an Egyptian labyrinth right here at Hawara, and the town of Hawara is still there and still keeps that name. The labyrinth isn't there anymore, but we've got records of it. It was very famous. So here's Hawara still retaining that name from the Department of the People's Giving and the House of the Department. So that still keeps that name from this time of Joseph. So we've got this one in the south and the Hawara up north where Joseph is. We know it by its Greek name, which is Avaris. This is the city in the land of Goshen in Egyptian Kessin. This is where the Israelite enslavement takes place. This is where the Exodus launches from. Avaris, right here in the north. Yeah. Oh, Avar. Yeah. Okay.
Took a little while.
Yeah. Yeah. You know.
Right.
In fact, there's a little thing right here that says, pull it up here. Whoop, one more. The little thing that right there, it said Zona de Goshen, zone of Goshen. So there that is. And there's the Exodus route going across over there. So this is where all of that is set up. So 1668 BC looks to be when Levi has his second son, Kohath, born, when Levi is about 37 years old. And this is a great stopping place because from here, great to see you. So from here, we will be picking up next week with some changes in the world around, including the birth of the dynasty of Babylon, who of course feature very prominently in the Bible. Yeah, so we'll see the origin of Babylon. Yes, exactly. So with that, any other questions, observations, thoughts, or comments on what we have looked at with the 7 years of plenty and Joseph's real life records of him in the secular Egyptian history and all that's happening with the growth and the blessing and the story and preparation for the years of famine? Yeah. Fire away.
The name that you had thrown out earlier, Simon 2, is that a place or a person?
That is a person. That was, looks to be, he was the vizier before Joseph. He was the one who probably transitioned out when Joseph was risen up.
Okay,
and
so he
so-
was demoted.
Yeah, it looked to be he was older. It looks like he died before the 7 years of famine happened.
Okay.
And so it seems like he was aging, and so it was perfect timing, of course, God knowing everything, where Joseph was officially made vizier, and then Simon too, transitioned Joseph into it, transitioned himself out. In fact, we have a statue to the former vizier by Vizier Anea, the one who lives. And it would make sense that Joseph did this in honor of the vizier who trained, basically adopted him, took him in and trained him up. And yeah. So again, everything just fits right along with the Bible. That never has to change. So we will pick that up next week from here. So we'll stop our share, stop our recording, and get ready for